Hi, and welcome to the second podcast of Maine Cannabis with Meredith and Anne Marie. I'm Meredith.
And I'm Anne Marie. And we're co-owners of Vetted Cannabis here in Sanford, Maine. And we're elated at the response we received from all of you to our first podcast.
The cannabis industry is really growing here in Maine and across the states of this great country of ours, especially as we continue to recover from the coronavirus pandemic.
It's been a long haul for everyone, and we feel that our industry has an important role to play in comforting and healing people as we slowly but surely return to something resembling normal life.
It's difficult but not impossible to define the word normal anymore. But we're all going to keep forging ahead to create a bright future, and we passionately believe that cannabis is going to play an important role in that regard.
Definitely. Well, with that much said, let's get on with our second podcast, which features some really amazing people in our industry.
But before we begin, please do check us out in Maine Women's Magazine. We were featured here. It gives you a little background about Vetted, where we came from, what we're doing, what we're all about.
January edition, page 56, Vetted Cannabis, and we certainly enjoy catering to the veteran servicemen and women. So Maine Cannabis Podcast welcomes Steve Austin, CPA of Austin and Associates of Auburn, Maine, with us today to talk about bookkeeping and accounting in the cannabis industry. And Steve, we welcome you, and we're so eager to hear your messaging today. But the emphasis I hope you'll bring is one of, this is a cash industry, which is very hard to maneuver when people are trying to transact everything electronically. And that's number one. And then number two, safety, the safety of those of us in the business for risk of theft and break-ins. And then lastly, certainly when we do have bookkeeping, we want to be properly situated for audits by way of, compliance with the IRS in all forms, both federally and state. So welcome, Steve Austin.
Well, hello, Anne Marie.
Hi.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, that's a lot to throw out to start with, but what I've noticed is not just in the cannabis industry, but overall, bookkeeping and accounting seem to be at the bottom of the pile as far as people's priorities.
Agree. Yep.
People tend to do what they do in business, what they do well, and worry about the
Bookkeeping at the end.
The details later. So
Correct.
from my perspective, obviously it's very important to get it done right, get it done early, get set up with a bookkeeping system, somebody knows how to use it, so you have some base to work with. The bookkeeping goes to the accountant or the CPA, who then prepares the tax returns.
So it makes sense. I mean, it's your wheelhouse that you'd see bookkeeping as a priority, and the rest of us maybe not so much. But tell us, Steve, how did you get into the cannabis industry? What makes you maybe a subject matter expert for us to listen further from?
Well, I wouldn't claim to be an expert by any stretch, but I have been involved in the cannabis industry for about 10 years.
Wow.
Which is probably the beginning back to what I call the Wild West days. I came into two fairly large cannabis clients through referrals from lifetime friends that I grew up with. They were involved, they were getting the medicine, and then they told these owners that they knew me and they thought that I might be able to help them out. So I started out with not knowing anything about the cannabis tax situation, and I ended up with two big clients right out of the gate. So I said, well, I need some education, and I spent time going out to the West in California to some seminars, because obviously the industry was
Originated out there.
well, they were much farther along, and I met some CPAs and tax attorneys out there that had been in it a long time, and learned from them, and kind of went from there, and it's been a very interesting ride.
So 10 years of learning about the tax code and how it continues to change, because even still, the laws are so slow in descheduling cannabis. It's federally illegal, yet states it's permissible and it's legal. So dancing through those tax codes, I can't imagine what you have to do. But Steve, what are the lessons learned that we could bring to a small business owner today in the cannabis industry in the state of Maine?
Well, as I said before, the best thing is to get organized early and get your record keeping set up so you can track your sales, your expenses. Uh, I have a lot of people come to me and I say, have you filed sales tax returns since you've been in business? And they say, what's that? So again, preparation is the key, and it's a very important part of any business. So I'd say that's the first thing, is to get a good bookkeeper, try to find an accountant that's has some experience in the business, and then just keep track of things on a daily basis.
Now, the state of Maine has endorsed this metric. It's a software program system that's a seed to sale tracking system that we're all going to have to embrace. And then also, so that's a whole nother realm of information that we need to learn about, the tax code and how it applies to us. I mean, as I understand it, you need 1099s. What is a 1099 for certain people? And is
1099s are supposed to be issued to non-corporate vendors, say a grower that is not incorporated. If you pay them over $600 in a year, you're supposed to issue a 1099, which is a version of reporting the income that you paid to them.
So, for example, if I were a small business, which we are, and we have an electrician come in, we would have to issue a 1099 for that electrician that provided services to us if we paid out?
Well, most businesses are corporations.
I see.
And you don't have to issue 1099s to corporations. So that's the big key. People aren't as good about filing the 1099s as they should be. There are penalties for not doing it on a scale of 1 to 10 as far as everything you need to deal with.
Low?
I wouldn't say low, but I'd give it a 6 or a 7. But the biggest issue you find in cannabis, especially on the tax side, is the called 280E section of the Internal Revenue Code, which doesn't allow you to take all your tax deductions as normal businesses would. So it's quite complicated how to do this. Anything to do with trafficking, which means sales, is technically not deductible. So you just have to look at the big issues are normally payroll. So if you have a business that has, say, a retail shop and a grow, the retail employees technically are not supposed to be able to, their wages are not supposed to be deducted. But say if they do other things other than, say, being a bud tender, say they do some preparation and things, then you can split their payroll. So you really need to get down through each one of your individual employees, figure out what's what, and then apply that percentages to them. The next big thing is occupancy, which is rent, utilities, and that sort of thing. So say if you have a retail shop that takes up about 25% of your building, and your grow it takes up 75%, then basically you can deduct 75% of your occupancy costs because it goes towards the cultivation and the cost of sales. And the retail side, again, supposedly is not supposed to be deducted because it's retail and called trafficking by the
280E.
Yeah, that's where the 280E comes in. So those are the big areas you have to concentrate on. Things like advertising normally aren't deductible because it's purely to generate sales. And a lot of things, there's gray area, say the internet, say some travel. So there's different things that you have to, again, look at each expense individually and decide what you can do.
More reason to have a specialist.
It's just, that's where the whole 280A game is played, is on the expense side of things. And it can be quite expensive when you say you have $500,000 of expenses and you lose 100,000 of them. That drops right to your bottom line, and you pay extra tax on $100,000 that any other business wouldn't have to pay. I suspect at some point 280E will go away. The only reason it is because cannabis is still Schedule 1.
Federally illegal.
Yeah, and once they drops down as 2, which God knows it should be, the 280 theoretically should go away, but the IRS and Congress look at it as a great way to make money
I see.
and a huge growing business. So they're not on the fast track to get rid of 280E.
Steve Austin, CPA, certified public accountant. He's vetted cannabis CPA. He's our accountant. Also from Austin Associates of Auburn, Maine. We thank Steve for discussing the cannabis industry today with us and taxation and how to prevent IRS auditing. So, Steve, we say farewell and we thank you for all your information you shared today.
Thank you, Anne Marie.
Hey, it's Maine Cannabis Podcast welcoming Jeffrey Sloat of Highwire Hydroponics of Raymond, Maine with us today. And
Thanks for having me.
Oh, delighted to have you. So, Jeff, what we know of you, what little we know of you, is you are a Maine resident. You've been a cannabis grower for some years, and now you're really focusing your attention in hydroponics, and now you're really a chemical-based expert, and would love to hear a little bit about that. But tell us, about yourself.
Well, I have been a Maine resident my whole life, 36 years, and I've been on my journey in the marijuana field for the last 10 years. And it's taken me to hydro shops big and grows big and small, and it's been a great learning experience. But now I'm at Highwire Hydroponics in Raymond, Maine, and I'm the senior accounts manager there. And one thing that we definitely learned the most about is plant nutrients and what helps the plants grow, and how, as a hobby grower or a dispensary grower or a caregiver level grower, how can I best use the tools to make these plants healthy and successful.
Excellent. So I'm going to start off with a question. What's the definition of hydroponics? What does that mean?
Oh man, hydroponics is a very, very big term to break down, because there's so many different ways we can use hydroponics in the grow room. Deep water culture, flood and drain tables, even just your basic kind of drip system can be used in a hydroponic grow. And, again, this technology and this industry keeps pushing that stuff forward. So we have so many tools to automate and just grow environments so these plants can get these nutrients and can get these. It's mostly it's just so fun to work with these tools that we're kind of putting forth. But hydroponics, in kind of like, a broad term, is just feeding these plants and getting nutrients to them automated, and making sure the plant grows in a soilless medium.
Soilless.
And so it can be soilless, can be water, it can be coconut. There's tons of mediums that we can use as a tool in the grow room.
I see. So as a cannabis grower out in the state of Maine, one does want to optimize the growth cycle, no doubt about it, and minimize pest damage, and also to shrink the timeline, whatever we can do to ease workload, man hours of work, as well as speed the time that product, that medicine, can be in the hands of the patient, is what we're all striving to learn. So tell us about that.
Oh, there's so much we can do to, like you said, optimize those plants in that time, because it takes a long time to grow these plants. A healthy plant taking over 3 months to really grow. How, as a grower and a farmer, can I make the process quicker? So that's the stuff we're doing with the hydroponics. And the coconut is one that the coconut husk is used throughout this industry right now. It's a very popular way to get nutrients to the plants quicker, because in coconut you can allow it to break down quicker, it becomes bioavailable much faster, and those nutrients just get uptaken by those plants in a very rapid rate.
You know what? When you talk about cocoa, it makes me immediately think about growing and gardening, and that's a realm that's outside of my expertise. But I do have my daughter, who's fantastic, amazing with growing. Hi there, John Jemison. Welcome to Maine Cannabis Podcast. I'm Anne Marie, the nurse practitioner at Vetted, and
I'm Meredith, the owner of Vetted.
Yeah, and nurse as well. So, John, we're very intrigued to hear your story, as we've learned that not only are you a teacher at a University of Maine, but also a member of the Maine board, pesticide board, as well as a hemp grower, a hemp specialist. And we're eager to hear about the medicinal uses of hemp, and the requirements, land space, and how much you yield, and etc. So let's give you the floor and have you tell us about yourself, your name, your title, and your role within the state of Maine.
All right. I am John Jemison, and I am an extension. I'm an extension specialist. I do some teaching at the university, and I have worked in soil and water quality. I've worked with corn. I've worked with potatoes over the years, and I started here in 1991. So I've been at this working with the farming community for a long time. I started serving on the Board of Pesticide Control as the university's representative on it in 2002. And so that's been kind of an interesting experience. And so I got interested in hemp because in 2014, the 2014 Farm Bill sort of cracked the door, if you would, to begin to get farmers to look at hemp. And then in 2016, the state decided to develop their own program to allow people to grow hemp, and most everybody was in it for what I call resinous hemp production, and not for grain or not for fiber.
What did you say that term was? Resident? What did you say?
Resinous. What they're like, they want to grow for the flower where the resin exists in the flower, and then basically get those cannabinoids out of the flower and get it into oils and for medicinal purposes. And so I got interested in helping the state try to make the rules and their stuff basically. And then I saw my role is to try to help farmers do it better, to look at understanding the fertility needs of this crop, spacing, timing, and trying to figure out how to manage the THC levels, which is really, I think, one of the hardest parts of this process is trying to figure out how can you get enough CBD in this plant to be valuable and not press the levels that are not allowed, which is now it's going to be 0.3% total THC. And I think, I have my own opinions on that, but I think that level is going to make it really hard for growers here to be able to do this profitably compared to other parts of the country.
I just have a question, John, not to interrupt you, back to the pesticide certification. Now, would you recommend anybody within the community, whether they grow hemp or, the medical marijuana caregiver right now, to get pesticide certified?
Yes, I think there is actually a requirement that everybody get at least the core training in pesticide certification, because whether you use a synthetic pesticide or you're using organic controls, you still need to understand everything. And we know that in cannabis production, that what's actually allowed is very, very limited. And the state has a flow chart that helps people that are working in growing cannabis to understand what they can and can't use. And it's a little looser in hemp production because there are now labels that have industrial hemp on them because they've been able to do the research necessary to figure out what could be left in them in terms of residues on the crop. But in terms of cannabis production, there are no federally legal pesticides that you can actually use. So the state has developed specific practices that if a particular product can be used on any plant, it doesn't have any specific directions for use on one plant or another plant, that gets you like in the door. And then can it be used on food crops and can it be used indoors and outdoors? There's a flow chart that I would recommend everybody that grows cannabis look at so they can understand what can be used and what can't be used.
Right. So Anne Marie, myself, and our head grower, we've all been pesticide certified. We got that initial applicator license, and everything from what I've interpreted, from a growth hormone like Clonex to spinoside is considered a pesticide. So I think there's a lot of
Exceptions.
Yeah, within the community, because people are like, oh, I don't use pesticide. I'm not getting that license. I don't need to sit for that exam. And I'm like, well, there's more to it than that. A pesticide really isn't just skull and crossbones. It's really, a growth hormone or a pH'd water that you're applying to the plant. It's really whatever is altering the actual plant. And which leads me to my next question. You grow hemp, and we cultivate, medical marijuana within our building, which you're aware of. How would you compare those two, the hemp and the medicinal marijuana that we, cultivate in our building? Are they comparable? Are they not comparable? Like, say if we were to do some research and look into studies, could we use those hemp studies to really gauge our fertilizer or our growing methods?
So that's a very good question. Indoors and outdoors are different environments, but the plant is real similar because it's the same plant, right?
Right, and it's closer than a tomato.
They're all Cannabis sativa. Right, exactly. And so what I think you can do is, if you're concerned about a disease or an insect affecting your operation inside, that same disease and insect could potentially be a problem outside. Outside, you have more natural predators. So if I'm growing hemp in my backyard, in my garden, there's probably going to be more ladybugs available to eat aphids. And there's also a misconception that this plant doesn't need fertilizer. It doesn't have pests, and it's a magic plant. And it may be a magic plant, but it still gets pests and it still has lots of diseases. So we have to monitor those all the time. And the nice part about growing inside is that you can keep airflow and you can monitor how the moisture in your plants and things like that more easily than you can outside. If it rains for 7 days in a row in late September, I'm going to have bud rot, and there's nothing I'm going to be able to do about it except cry. It's just the way it is, right? And if you in frost and all sorts of things can affect an outdoor grow that you don't have to worry about inside. But in terms of fertility, we're still trying to figure out. And so what I'm going to do as a researcher this year, we've had bad weed problems in growing hemp outside, because you have to have wide spacing and you have to use a lot of plastic, and a lot of people don't want to use plastic. So what we're going to do this year is look at some alternatives. We'll have black plastic as the standard, but we'll have some nifty cultivation tools that we're going to try. We have grown rye, and we'll let that rye grow, and then we're going to sickle bar mow it and have it lay and be a mulch, and we'll no-till plant into that. And then the other way we were going to do is to roll the rye with a roller crimper and then plant into that. So those are our treatments that we're going to do in here in Central Maine and down in the Mid-Coast area.
Wow.
And I've got another grant into Sarah that if it gets funded, we would also do nitrogen response trials and rotation studies.
Trials. Say that again. So nitrogen response trials?
Right, because what we're really trying to figure out is how much nitrogen is the right amount to make a happy crop that, as you know, when we grow cannabis, we tend to want to have a bunch of nitrogen up front, and then you kind of like it go away, right?
In flower, right?
Once it goes into flower, right? And so we need to know how much do we need to put on so that, and sort of in timing, because I think if we put it up front, and not too much, and then when the plant goes into flower,
ramp up maybe
we have tricks at home that you might want to add more phosphorus at that point, or if you're irrigating, you have some more controls over that. But we're trying to figure out roughly how much to guide the grower to have the healthiest plant, but also the highest cannabinoid
John,
production that you can get.
It's very timely that you even bring this topic up. Just this week, Meredith was discussing, the importance of tissue sampling. How can we have a tissue sampled in regards to finding out the
fertilizer and how much is really being put into the plant? Because, you can do runoffs, but really it's the tissue sample that will show us the exact calculation of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. So I had talked to Nova Analytical, which is a lab that is actually going to sit on the podcast shortly, about doing a tissue sample and, really honing in our fertilizer and how. So this is awesome hearing that you got a grant to do something that I've been really excited to get involved with, really honing in on that.
So we'd love to hear about your results when those are, concluded. This would be a great.
You betcha. And hopefully we'll have 2 locations because we'll be working with my colleague in Vermont if that actually gets funded. I'm a little concerned right now because the market is fairly swamped, and it could be that the panelists that are going to look at the grants will say, well, yes, it's needed, but it's maybe not as needed right now because the market's down. Maybe we'll put our money over here. Right. But we will certainly do the weed management study this year. Well, and then, because the other thing I think our growers really need to understand is the importance of crop rotation. And when you out in the field, I think if you grow cannabis more than 1 year and 3, you'll see some disease buildup in a particular field. So what I want to try to look at is what happens if you grow cannabis 3 years in a row, 2 years, or 1 year, and so it's such that in the last year the whole field is cannabis, and we'll go in and evaluate all the plants for disease incidents and see if we see a buildup in disease over time. Because I'm fairly confident, just from what I've seen already, that growers that are not rotating are running into problems and with disease buildup. And we have white mold, we have botrytis, we have septorial leaf spot, we have all kinds of different diseases out there that can impact cannabis. Wow. And so
John,
that's what we need to
you sound
be working
like
on.
a fascinating scientist in an industry that needs so many more of you. We need all the information and science and to help, provide us with the best practices in growing. So it results in the cleanest, safest medicine, plant-based medicine. That's, we're striving for that. John, I want to know if you're familiar with, Maine just recently proposed changes to the medicinal cannabis law. In fact, it's an 81-page proposed change. Are you familiar with that? And if so, do you have any concerns about that?
I do. I did look at it. I actually wrote my own comments to ONP about the rules. I think I do believe that the small medical grower with the small caregiver operation is in it for a reason, and that reason is to produce clean, high quality medicine. Mm-hmm. And my attitude when I wrote my comments was like, we've been doing this for 20 years. You bring in somebody, a consulting group from who's worked with other states that have legalized, and you're trying to come in and impose a system that I think is overly burdensome. If there were consistent problems in the industry, then I would say, yes, we definitely needed to have these kinds of changes. But as far as I've seen, we had one incident of a major pesticide violation on the pesticide board in my 20 years. And it was a large producer that was using unlicensed products with lacking proper personal protective equipment, no logging in on what they were using or when they were using it. And the Board of Pesticide Control gave them the highest fine that we could give because we know that these people are in business to produce medicine for compromised people. And
this was all public knowledge, no? Like, was this wellness?
This is all public knowledge.
Yeah, this was Wellness Connection, correct? I believe.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, and it is public knowledge. And so, based on that, I think I have a personal opinion that large scale production, it's just harder to do it carefully. And when you it's like growing 3,000 acres of potatoes or growing 30 acres of potatoes. Can you keep a better eye on 30 acres of potatoes than you can 3,000 acres of potatoes?
Agreed.
Probably.
Yep.
Yeah.
Point well made. Yeah.
And it's just being able to stay on it and recognize a problem sooner. And I think a small grower, I just think they have grossly overreached with this, and I hope. It's the same problem. I have the same issue with USDA and their hemp rules. They overreached. There's no reason in the world why we have to have 0.3 total THC in hemp residues. There's no scientific basis for it. You could have up to 1%, and if you have a 20% or 18% CBD content, that 1% you would never feel it because the THC can't react with the receptor because there's too much CBD around.
Yep.
And it's like there's I don't know why this poor plant has had such a hard time getting back to some semblance of acceptance because it is such a good plant.
Yeah.
And I am confident that CBD and cannabinoid, a regular intake of CBD can really help overall health and overall wellness. Yeah. And it's all part of that system. And I don't know, it just seems unfortunate to me because particularly when we compare growing hemp in the East, growing hemp out in Colorado, the cost of production differences are just tremendously different. We're much more expensive here because we need so much more labor and we have to dry everything and we have to, we have a much wider spacing so we can't plant as densely. And out there, their disease problems are lower and they can combine out in the field and leave it in the field and then bale it up and run it through a hammer mill and then they can extract the whole plant out there.
John,
so we are at a competitive disadvantage, and it's really unfortunate. And I think that's what we're seeing in the industry. Yeah.
I can hear your message about a plea to have their decision makers have more of an evidence-based foundation for what they do and how they make these changes. But hearing your passion for growing and your knowledge, and I can tell you, Meredith and I see you as a subject matter expert. What's your message that you'd like to convey to Maine cannabis growers? Coming from your years of tenure as an instructor, academic field, research base yourself, having a hands-on experience growing hemp, knowing that it's an outside cultivation. I mean, essentially it's outside, and the land mass requirements and the yield, and then all the regulatory burdens that have been implied. What's your message to cannabis growers of Maine?
Well, for the hemp growers, my message, I guess, right now would be stay small, learn, grow it, and learn, and but only grow if you have a really. And I think the best setups are people that are growing, processing, and selling. So they grow their own, they make their own oils, they make their own products, and then they sell those products. I think those have been the most successful businesses. We've had way too many people dive in, get big, and with this hope that somebody would come in and take the product that they've grown and buy it in mass. And we are, just traditionally we have a really hard time competing in that commoditized kind of system. So I think a smaller, all the way through from start to finish is the better way to go. And likewise, I really, really hope that from the medical cannabis world that we'll have a second look at OMP will take a second look at what they're proposing and make it such that that we can maintain these small businesses. I just think that again,
message.
It's like you can't compete, right? You just can't compete in a commoditized market, and it would be a real shame.
I love your message. Both Meredith and I, just as a family owned and operated, we are that we are that entity that we hope to remain focused and be proud of our small little, microclimate that we have here. So, John Jemison, we're very grateful.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming on and talking with us.
And sharing your knowledge.
Always.
We hope that we can invite you in the future once you
come down. Yeah.
Yep, have your grant findings, and you can share that with us. We would be pleased, and you'd be helping so many others. So with that, we say Maine Cannabis Podcast says farewell to John Jemison, and we thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be with you guys. Thank you.
Known throughout New England as the Harp Lady, Elizabeth Roth is one of Maine's most unique performers. Not only did she study the harp with such notables as Mildred Dilling and Deborah Henson Conant, but she also received a BA in vocal performance from Cleveland State University. So as you're about to learn, when she performs, she both sings and plays. The effect is incredibly beautiful.
Quite talented. Elizabeth moved to Maine from New York City, where she studied drama at the American Music and Dance Academy, and she performed at several off-Broadway productions. Since moving here, though, she has played all over our fair state, including at the Maine State Music Theater and Portland Stage. Her motto is, "Have harp, will travel."
Accompanying Elizabeth on trombone is George Weiss, a graduate of the prestigious Juilliard School in New York City.
Cool.
George is currently the executive director of Mountaintop Music Center in Conway, New Hampshire, a position he's held since 2011. From 2009 to 2011, George was the assistant conductor of the Southern Maine Symphony.
With the credentials that both Elizabeth and George have, you're probably thinking they're about to perform a piece of classical music. Oh no, well, instead of Beethoven or Mozart, you're going to be treated to an amazing performance of, yes, the Grateful Dead, the classic song Ripple. Let's see it, listen.
If my words did glow with the gold of sunshine, and my tunes were played on the harp unstrung, would you hear my voice through music? Would you hold me dear as it were your own?
And that beautiful performance brings our second podcast to a close.
Once again, we want to thank all of our guests who are forging the way in the cannabis industry, not just here in Maine, but all across the nation.
We're proud to be a part of this important industry and in a state that has truly been a trendsetter.
And as I'm sure you know, more and more people are discovering the many benefits of living in Maine.
And that is including us. We've moved here from Massachusetts about 10 years ago. Maine is beautiful, diverse, and altogether extraordinary state. We're proud to be representing Maine in this podcast.
For sure.
We'll be back soon, but in the meantime,
we encourage you to keep in touch and keep sending us suggestions for topics you'd like to see us cover.
If you have a favorite Maine-based band, a performer,